Hey everyone, we are live now, and because it's a couple of minutes before 6:30, we will give folks a chance to log on. And if you want to say hi, I see that one person is on now. If you want to say hey in the chat, please feel free. We have a couple people. Oh, hey, Carol.
Hey, Carol.
Good to see you. I mean, see you.
Yeah.
I have to always say that.
Sort of see you.
Oh, good to see Jill as well. We had good weather here today in Indianapolis. Very
beautiful weather today.
Yeah, sunshine, warmth.
Yeah, absolutely. All about plants.
Impending spring, we hope.
Yeah.
Jill says, yes, please.
Right.
Too early, impending spring. Our garden also says, yes, please. But that was good rain also.
Yeah. I think it's going to give us a head start.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's always good to get that first initial rain in the spring.
Absolutely.
I was thinking we might go at some point and clean up the MLK garden.
Oh.
Just clean it up.
Right.
You know,
if they're done with construction.
See what's volunteering over there. And just, see what we can do.
Definitely.
For the season.
Okay, we have more people on, which is wonderful. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Charlie.
So these numbers on the screen are not always telling us the truth.
Okay. That's cool.
So in 1 minute, I will give an official introduction and we will get started.
Yes.
Or half a minute.
Precise. The precision is real.
Yes. So welcome to the LabOratory Live. This is our first Sundays that we do for the LabOratory Church. We moved into this new format the beginning of this year, and it is now a conversational format. We will be talking to each other. However, we also want to talk to you. So please communicate with us in the chat. And as far as formatting, it's pretty, loose. Except for we will start with a scripture reading and another reading I want to share. Then we'll have discussion and we will close at the end with prayer. So if you have any prayer requests that you would like to share publicly for the end, you can also put that in the chat. But if you do not, you can always text me or email me. And as always, we will keep you in prayer. Excellent. Do you have anything you would like to say for the introduction?
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Great. Okay, so today our focus will be, we are in the season of Lent, so we will have a scripture about that. We will have the temptation of Christ in the desert. However, because this is spring and impending spring, as we are hopeful, we will also be focusing on creation care and the Genesis creation story. So I will start with that passage, which is Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in their image. In the image of God, they created them. Male and female, they created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. God said, "See, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. I will now read our scripture from Matthew, the temptation of Christ in the desert by Satan. And that is Matthew 4, verses 1 through 11. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterwards he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will beat you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Bear you up, rather. Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their splendor. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited on him. The word of God for the people of God. So the first thing that strikes me about the creation story, before we get into the article about the temptation, is how often Christians misuse the word dominion and subdue.
Okay.
So often, if we look at the environment, it's about what can the earth do for me, right? It's the way that so many have interpreted dominion. It's as though it is, I have power over. It isn't power with. It isn't like care of, stewardship of. However, that's what God intended. The word dominion specifically is implied that human beings are God's representative in creation. And so this means that in our dominion over it, we are to treat it as we are made in God's image, as God would treat it.
Well, that's not classically how we see dominion, for sure. I think our culture equates dominion with dominance and
Absolutely.
oppression.
Definitely.
So, but when you put it in the representative light, that does have a bit. It does put a bit of a spin on it. And as I look at these words, dominion, I like to split words. You know,
I know you do.
I like to break words into pieces to see if I can find some meaning there. And in dominion, I see the word do.
That's true.
And then also minion,
Oh.
right?
Uh-huh.
And it makes me think of the movie, right? The minions, the little
Oh, the
minion,
little
right?
yellow.
Yeah, but I mean, basically, what a minion does is it carries out the mission of the culture, right?
Right.
And
Whatever their master
yeah,
tells them to do.
yeah. So there is an activity that's going on. There's a doing that's going on with this, and the doing is not from a top down perspective. It's not
Mm.
from a boss level. It's not from the supervisory level or anything like that. It's from underneath, which takes me to this next word, subdue,
Mm.
which also again has the word do in it,
Yes, it does.
except it's just spelled out differently, right? But when you put that sub in front, it also makes me again think of doing something from below, right? So just as this minion does, do things from below. So not to get too deep about it, but I feel like
No, go deep as you need to.
that that when we're exercising our dominion and then when we're subduing the earth, that we absolutely should be doing that in a way that represents God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that so much of the biblical passages, Christianity has so often been associated with power and earthly power. However, as we see in the temptation, it is not about earthly power at all.
Right.
Jesus was coming from under as well. Jesus was born and had to flee the powers. And then as we enter the season of Lent, we know that Jesus is on his way to the cross, which again, he was supposedly subdued by the powers that be, only they could not subdue his message.
Right.
And so it was definitely a ground up sort of approach rather than a top down.
Right. So that's a total misunderstanding. It's sort of a total reversal almost of the way we should understand what it means to be a servant leader.
Absolutely.
A servant with power.
Right.
And
creative power.
Yeah. And what is that actually for? Is that creative power available to you for dominance and for mistreatment and control? Or is that being made available to you for you to steward over the creation?
Well, obviously, to us. If we're meant to do it as though God does it, God gives us free will. So if God gives us free will, that is not the same as domineering, because domineering is basically clamping down on people and trying to get them to subdue to your will. And God, on the other hand, invites us to participate. He does not, or she, or they do not force us to do anything. Although that could make things easier, God gives us free will. So Jill shares, good point. We want to control and look at nature selfishly and not godlike, as you said.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's caused a huge problem in Western culture, especially because our inability to see nature as the place that we come from,
right,
makes it so foreign to us that when we damage it and we break the sustainability of it, it doesn't even register.
Well, until it gets extreme.
Right. Until there's a problem.
And we are getting to that extreme right now. And one of the reasons why we decided to talk about this subject today is because it is getting extreme. It is getting to the point now where even though we have been systematically separated from our connection with nature, so that most of us don't know where our food is grown. We don't know how our food is grown. We do not know what is in our food. We do not know what's in the animals that we eat. We don't know any of this for sure. Even with the labeling, sometimes there's inaccurate labeling, and then there's labeling that if you don't know what the words mean, you really don't understand what you're putting in your body, even though you have letters that spell a word. But what does that mean?
Right. So let's tie that reality back to the scripture. So Jesus was taken up to this high place and offered all of the things of the world, right? And that sounds like to me, Jesus was offered modern day conveniences.
Right.
He was offered all of them all at once. And he was able to witness against that, the fact that the things that we're putting inside of these trucks and trucking around and, dropping here and there selectively, depending on what your zip code is and what your population looks like. All of those things come from God. They belong to God. And the devil's offering of those things to Jesus was a false offering because he never had those things in his possession to offer in the first place. And that's
Bait and
how
switch.
That's how we get tricked away from our food source because of convenience and the service economy and things of this nature. This is the same offering that Jesus rebuked, basically, or refused, that we take and we deal with every day.
And we don't think about it
in those terms
because we're not in the literal desert facing a literal devil.
Right.
We don't understand that every day we make these types of choices.
Yeah.
So that is a perfect segue into this article that I found. It's by Father Jose Antonio Fortea. And he basically talks about the significance to the order of the 3 temptations that we read from Matthew. And so let me read what he says at the end, sort of a summary. He says these 3 temptations symbolize the phases of temptations we go through in the spiritual life. It has to be added that concretely, those which the devil used with Jesus were especially subtle. First, the devil tempted Jesus not with sin, but with imperfection. He was asked to stop doing a good, i.e., his fasting, and turn stones into bread. Then he was tempted with the spiritual good of the world. It is as if the devil were saying, make a sign of acknowledgement toward me, proud as I am, and I, as a reward, will put myself at your side. All I ask is that you acknowledge me, and I will help you in your work of saving souls. Are you not humble? Are you not capable of lowering yourself a little more for the eternal good of souls? The second temptation is packed with tremendous spiritual meaning. Jesus was not asked to stop being God. He was only asked to humble himself a little bit more. Could not the just one, who had made so many sacrifices for souls, make just one more? It is the temptation to do a little evil so as to achieve a greater good. I'll circle back to that. The final temptation is that of pride, to be publicly recognized. It was to prescind from the fact that it is God, in God's time, who exalts God's servants. Here, the devil was saying, even though God decides the time and the moment, why not bring the moment forward? Why remain in obscurity when so much good can be done by coming out into the light in a glorious and spectacular way? we can see that that this third temptation is the most complex and subtle of all. I know what comes up for me when I read that because I read it in advance.
That's right.
But does anything come up for you specifically with that?
Yeah. So in the cultural dance that
Mhm.
we do here, um, perfectionism is a strong theme. Many people suffer mental and emotional symptoms from perfectionism. Uh, the spiritual good for the world. What is that saying? Do you think?
I think oh, excuse me, here. I think what this author is saying, what the father is saying is that that if he bows to Satan, Satan's saying, "I'll give you everything that you want."
Okay, I see.
Yeah.
So
So the do a
taking
little evil so you can have
yes.
tremendous good.
So taking Lucifer's leadership.
Mhm.
So submitting yourself to bad leadership
Yes.
yeah, that's definitely a spiritual test because you're bound by that submission when you do that.
Mhm.
And then the exaltation piece, the third one.
To be publicly recognized. Let's see, what does it
Yes.
say?
Yeah.
Because if he threw himself off and the angels rescued him, then he would be seen as God. And
Hmm.
immediately, it wouldn't be like a subtle thing. He
Right.
wouldn't be coming in, on the down low, so to
Right.
speak.
Right.
It would be like, look, I'm God. Look, I told you I was God, and now I have all of this glorious evidence to
Hmm.
prove it to you so that you can't deny it. And that kind of goes back to the taking away the free will,
Hmm.
because who could resist? Who could resist?
That's right.
If you know it's God, if you see that, you especially,
Yeah.
without modern technology,
That's
you
a
see somebody
no-brainer.
who flies off a building
Yeah.
and they're saved by angels. Okay,
Absolutely.
cool.
Absolutely. So in that shortcutting
Mhm.
of the developmental curve, because God is operating seed, time, and harvest, and in those stages is just development that's happening.
Mhm.
So the enemy here tried to skirt that and or tried to offer Jesus, hey, you don't have to go through all of that stuff. You can have it right now, instantly. That goes right back to the cultural connection of how we're groomed and encouraged to be as people, as consumers, as citizens. Um,
Mhm.
and that's to be basically tied to creature comforts. And that's what matters to us. And because we've let that matter so much, we've lost connection with our food and we've lost connection with one another.
Absolutely. And when we tie it to pride, you know, if we could tie this to power and resources. If we follow the ways of the world, then we are told that we are productivity machines. You exist to make the most money, you exist to get the most power.
You're a beast.
Right. And if you do all of these things that we tell you is important,
Mhm.
you'll have all the money and you'll have all the power, and then you can do all of the good. However, as we can see evidenced
Mhm.
every day,
Yeah,
is that what happens? Is that what happens?
I don't think so.
When people get more and more money and more power, especially if it comes easy, do they appreciate it?
Mhm.
Do they use it wisely? And do they share it with others? Or do they store it up in houses for the moths to collect?
Mhm. Well, I believe that's written because the proportions that we
Very
see
few.
And that's exactly what I was about to speak to, because the proportions that we see folks giving back and folks hoarding and, all these different categories probably is about what the proportions were in antiquity,
Right, which was
right?
very low.
Right, because humans have practiced this culture since then,
Mhm.
and now we're trying to figure out a new way.
Right. Absolutely. So Jill notes that very few choose the better path, correct.
Mhm.
And then Terry points out it corrupts them. And I mean,
Yes.
we know that because we even have an expression, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Mhm. And so if
And Tammy says power is
it
addictive.
absolutely
Very
is,
much
it
so.
absolutely is. And our enemy, our spiritual enemy, knows all of these things about power and knows that in our innocence
Mhm.
as humans, we don't understand a lot of times the magnitude, not only of what power can do, but actually the power that we hold,
Right. We
right?
think we don't have power when all of us
Oh,
are
absolutely.
created with God's power,
Oh, yes.
actually.
Yes. And to bear witness to the fact that we have power, just as God could say be, and it was and it is, we also have, a limited capacity to do the same. And so we've said, be there a conversation at this time on this
And there
day,
is.
and here we are.
And
So
people are gathered.
so let us recognize the power that we have to say, be, and create a thing in our lives. Because all we have to do is say, hey, you thing, be alive. And then you start walking that way. You start making your behavior go
Match.
towards that thing that you said that you calling out of the universe, and you'll get there.
Absolutely. And we were talking about prayer. We talk about the power of words. And last year, I actually did a sermon about the creative power of our words.
Yeah.
So some of you have heard this before, but for those of you who haven't, our words really have power. And so it's also important that we're careful with the words that we use because, like you said, when we say something should be, even if it's bad, we have the power to make it happen.
Mhm.
And so we have to be careful not to accept the words that are spoken to us by the powers that be, that tell us to be fearful if we don't do what they say, that tell us that if we don't succumb to the traditions that they have imposed upon us, or the norms or the rules or whatever you want to call it, if we don't do those things, they tell us that we will suffer and die. However, we can use our words and say, God says that all of creation was given to us to sustain us and for us to sustain it, that interconnectedness. So we can farm, we can build, we can create. We can create new life, we can create new systems, we can create crops, we can do so many things, but we have to simply say the things
Mhm.
that we see as good, and then, like you said, do those things and they will happen.
Mhm.
And we might not always see the way. We said we were going to do a church and we did not know how we were going to do a church, but here the church is. Think about in your life all the things you said you were going to do and check and see if it happened
Mhm.
and what steps you took after you said you were going to do that thing.
Yes. I had a couple thoughts as you were talking. Um, in this power in words. I think that might be why Jesus specifically gave us the Lord's Prayer.
Mm.
So that, and I think sometimes that's why we're given inspiration at
Mhm.
times, because the words are being put in our mouths,
Hmm.
right? But we have to say them because this is a realm where we have freedom of choice.
Right.
And so we have to call for the thing, right? So we have to accept the inspiration, or we have to accept the prayer that was given to us, right?
Right. On
And
earth as it is in heaven.
yes, because when we come here as babes, we don't know what to pray for. We don't know what to ask God for.
Right.
And so a benevolent Jesus would give us a little package of words to
Mhm.
put us on the right track, you know? And
Absolutely.
those things are helpful because as babies, we don't know what we don't know. And you can be a 90 or a 100-year-old person,
Mhm.
but when it comes to things of the spirit and God, we're all like little babies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our view is so limited
Yeah.
that even as we grow older and wiser and learn and all over time, with all the time that we might have,
It's
let's
still
give us
so
120
much.
years
Yeah.
just on the super long
Right.
run. Even in 120 years,
Yeah.
our place and our view in the entire universe and in the entire span of history is
It's
tiny.
so tiny. Right.
Yet, look what we can do in such a tiny space.
Mhm.
Look how we can create good and evil, life and death. We can be free. We can be enslaved. We have so many different courses of action
Well,
in such a small amount of time.
if you think about it, in the David Goliath story,
Mhm.
Goliath was taken out with a smooth stone, with a pebble.
And a slingshot.
Right. So a small thing that's placed in the right spot can be the end
And I think you
of
use
something
the
very big.
analogy a lot, like when you throw a pebble in the water,
Mhm.
the ripples,
Yeah.
how far-reaching
How
they
far
are.
they go out. So let's not discount the power of small things, because a sequoia comes out of a seed.
Exactly.
A redwood comes out of a seed. You know, a blue whale comes out of a seed. So there's power in us little things, and all we have to do is recognize that power and be fruitful with that power
Mhm.
and multiply that power.
Right.
That's what I heard you say when you read that.
And I believe that that is what we're to do. You know, we often assume, and you and I were talking about this before, was that we assume that the be fruitful and multiply
Yeah.
means continuing to make more humans.
Right. Well,
And
God wouldn't have to tell us that.
well, not with the way that we conceive.
That we don't have to be
It's not a
told that.
problem. But when we think about be fruitful and multiply in light of the Lord's Prayer,
Mm,
for example,
mm,
if the prayer that Jesus tells us to pray is on earth as it is in heaven, thy will be done, and the realm of God is within us, that means we can choose peace on earth. We can choose loving our neighbor as ourselves. We can choose all of these things that God always has intended for us.
mm. Yeah, we absolutely become those things when we choose them. We absolutely become neighborly love and, all of these things that we want to see in the world from others.
Mhm.
When we model those things, it's being seen.
And can be contagious.
Yeah.
Just like the program things that we hear, the violence, the competition, the scarcity, all of the harmful things, the fear, the all the things that we do out of fear. Imagine Imagine for a second if every single person that proclaimed to be a Christian
Mm.
actually chose to love their neighbor as themselves. They actually chose the greater good of all humanity and all life on earth over what they're taught to do for selfish gain. If every person who said they believed in Jesus did that, I mean, there would be no more war. There would be no more hunger. There would be no more homelessness. There would be no more assault. There would be no more murder. If billions of people chose love over fear, if billions of people chose sharing over selfishness, I mean, it's a spiritual shift. And that's why we kind of tied the temptation of Christ to the creation story, because when we choose the spiritual path, when we choose the way of love, every choice that we make on a daily basis then can become a powerful choice of love in our words and our deeds. And in that contagion, again, things can change.
Well, just like in sports, um, there's momentum.
Mm,
There's momentum that has to take place in the garden,
absolutely.
right? To get your car going, it takes momentum to
Mm,
get up to speed. So that's why the principle of not despising the day of small things is there for us to hold, so that when things are small and we're gaining our momentum,
mm.
that we don't curse that space with our words and our feelings, right? And our energy.
Absolutely. Because it's also preparation.
Mhm.
The same way that seeds need preparation of soil, they need fertilizer, they need sunlight, they need water. We need these things as we grow too. And since you pointed out earlier that we're spiritual babies, we need to do things slowly because we don't have enough information. The things that we can do quickly are the things that we choose every day. And Jill mentioned this, excellent segue, Jill, is the fruit of the Spirit. That's another thing that we consistently talk about, is because, when we say we're a Christian, we say, well, but how do we love our neighbor as ourselves? How do we decide to choose the spiritual path versus the physical path when there's so much tied up to our survival in the physical path? It's discernment. We use the fruit of the Spirit to help us discern what the right choice is, because sometimes, as the devil did in the temptation, he made what he was offering Jesus so similar to the outcome that Jesus was seeking that it would make it seem like, oh, it's not a big deal if you do it this way. Like the father said in
Mhm.
this article,
Mhm.
I just need you to do just a tiny little bit of evil, and then
Mhm.
so much good will come from that.
Right.
Well, that comes from hurrying up
Yeah. And it comes from people
and
thinking
pride.
but also there's a philosophy out there that people think about doing the wrong thing for the right reason.
Right. That's very
Okay.
prominent.
That's a real paradigm. But when
Mhm.
you were talking, it also reminded me that not only did was this offering made, but it was timed. It was specifically timed to when Jesus was famished.
Mm. Mhm.
So what happens is this enemy waits until we get into our lowest spot,
Mhm.
then comes in with the offer.
Absolutely.
right? Because that's where the spiritual test is. Are you going to take that out, or are you going to call God?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that does ask us to test our faith.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because if we think about the God of Moses, for
Mm-hmm.
example, when the Israelites were taken out of slavery, which is a very important comparison, when the Israelites were taken out of slavery and into the desert again for 40 years this time, they were told that their daily needs would be met.
Mm-hmm.
They would receive manna.
Yeah.
They couldn't store the manna.
Mm-hmm.
They could not earn the manna. They just had to have faith that every day that manna would be there. And so for that day, they would be sustained.
There you go. And one of the things that we've been talking about is being present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see God, and this is God dealing with our mental health right here, trying to make us focus on being present with our circumstances, right? Instead of worrying about, well, what happened back when we was in Egypt, when we were slaves,
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to happen in the promised land,
And when is it going to happen?
and how is it going to be, and will I have all my goats and chickens and all of this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And God is like, hey, what about right now? Because we just said the other night, the only time we're alive is right now when we're breathing,
Mm-hmm.
in or out. That when back in the day, that's gone. And tomorrow is not here yet. So that's why the present is equivalent of a gift, right? It's a present. It's a gift to us to be in our bodies and feel safe. So as spiritual babes, we got to rest. Let's just compare that to the infant. The
Mhm.
baby is resting all the time. And you think, well, what is that baby doing? That baby is growing.
That's true.
So when we get on the treadmill and we practice retail life and treadmill culture, we lose a lot of that
Presence.
developmental time, the presence, and the development that happens during rest.
Oh, absolutely.
Because during your rest time, inspiration is coming up.
And that is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not only true in a spiritual sense, it's also true in an artistic sense. If you look at photographers, graphic artists, painters, writers, musicians who write lyrics and music,
Mm-hmm.
the time that it takes to write and draw and paint and photograph in that moment is not very long,
Mm-hmm.
but the amount of struggle time, concentration time, not thinking about it time, so that like the things that you're going through could kind of like percolate through you. That's where the biggest inspiration happens.
Mm-hmm.
You do the work, but you also rest,
right,
and let God and inspiration, the spirit, whatever you choose to call it in this specific, for artistic sake, it percolates in during the rest time in combination with the steps you've already taken.
And Jesus demonstrated that to us by sequestering himself, right?
Yes.
By going away sometimes to rest and to rejuvenate, right? And let God refill.
Absolutely.
And when you have one person that's willing to behave that way in this world, it changes things.
Absolutely.
It changes things greatly. So if you have more than one person, like Jesus had the disciples,
Mm-hmm.
this is not a big group of folks. This is a small, like that little stone,
mm-hmm.
that's constantly bearing down on the devil's forehead, constantly,
Mm-hmm.
because this energy keeps reproducing itself,
right,
and making more
ripples
ones, that's trying to follow in that path. And like Tammy said, it's power in numbers. So,
Absolutely.
so two, one of us can set 1,000 demons to flight. Two of us, believers, can set 10,000 demons to flight. So we have a lot of
Exponential.
power because our exponent is God, right?
Right.
So if you think about the scale of numbers, right? 0 to 9. Let's just look at that. Well,
Mhm.
you know, God is represented in the number one because there's only the one, right?
Mhm.
So when you continue on up that scale and you get to the 9, it starts back over at the one again, right?
Mm.
And it makes that 10, right?
Mm.
So when I look at those numbers, I see God as the one, but I see myself as a 0,
Mm.
right? But by the time I stay with God through those levels, 1 through
Mhm.
9 to 10, now I'm a 0 that's standing next to the creator.
You have more zeros past you.
That's what changes things. That's
Absolutely.
what changes it.
Yep. And so we're coming up, we're at 7:15, so we've got a few minutes
Yes.
left.
Yeah.
But one thing that I wanted to talk about related to being stewards is that I think with what we're seeing with the worldly priorities versus the spiritual priorities, we need to continue to do our spiritual walk so that we can make a difference in the material and physical things happening in our world. The train wreck that happened in East Palestine has been heavy on our minds because we don't know the full effect of it. The way that they burned the chemicals and caused dioxin to go in the air, we don't know how much toxicity got into the groundwater, and it's north of the Ohio River, which feeds the Mississippi River. And I'm not trying to be a doomsday person right now. However, if we're stewards of the earth, we have to look at these events and we have to do something different.
And we have to talk to each other if we care about each other.
Absolutely. And there are a couple of things at work here. One thing is the rail workers who were on strike, who were basically told by the federal government, here's the deal you get, you can't strike. That takes away power from workers that is needed if we're truly liberated. Striking is how we have limited work weeks, even though, in our humble opinion, not limited enough, but progress is progress.
Yeah.
We need unions. We need people to say no to things that are expected of us to pay bills. When they control our finances in that way and cause us to always serve the paycheck rather than what our fellow human and environment needs, these types of accidents happen. We let them keep power over us when they only care about unsustainable greed. And so we need to stop supporting businesses that are oppressive. We need to grow our own food wherever we can, even if it's a tomato plant in every person's house, then we share with our neighbors. There are active things that we can do to refuse to participate in those who are harming our environment. And the train industry in particular, the infrastructure, all of these things are because people are not standing up and demanding that we as humans take care of each other and our planet.
Well, I didn't get a chance to tell you this, but they had another train wreck,
Oh,
but it wasn't toxic. But Ohio had another train wreck
today?
yesterday.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And lest you think this is a very uncommon practice, first of all, let me just share, I was in a train wreck. I was in a literal train wreck outside of Yazoo City, Mississippi in, was it 2004? 2004. A lot of stuff was going on in my life that was like a figurative train wreck, and then I had a literal train wreck, and it was terrifying. And the thing about the train wreck, which is relevant to today's story, is that where the train wrecked, it was right before a river, and the train flipped upside down. But right before the train was rattling really, really badly. I was on an Amtrak train, and the conductor had walked through and said, "These are the worst set of tracks from New Orleans to Chicago." That's the particular line that I was on. And not 2 minutes after he said those words, I was flipped upside down on the window. A woman who had been sitting diagonally across from me was on top of me. And by the time the train came to a stop, we were both in the luggage rack. And it was a swamp, but thankfully it had been droughted. So we were able to walk around and not,
Gators and stuff.
get eaten by a gator.
Snakes.
But it was terrifying. And the more terrifying thing is that not only they knew the tracks were bad, is that the same place we wrecked, like a couple of years before, there had been an industrial train wreck in the same spot. And that town also had to be evacuated. But still, there was a second train wreck from an Amtrak train a couple of years later. So things are not being fixed the way they're supposed to be, and they're keeping information away from us. So the way that we can really take these sorts of news events and do something about it is A, care, even when it doesn't affect us directly, and B, believe people when they say there's a problem. If people are telling you there's racism, believe them. If people are telling you there's sexism, believe them. If people tell you there's corruption that is causing their children to have like all these health problems, we have to believe them. And we have to come together to work together, even when the powers that be refuse. Because we have power in numbers, as Tammy so rightfully said. And as Christians who want to love our neighbor as ourselves, we are called to come together and take very real action in this life for these tragedies.
So I totally agree. And Jill said accountability and transparency.
Yes.
Now, this is the litmus test. We must be transparent and hold ourselves accountable first. So that when we go in to do these things, we have what's called moral authority. This is an energy that goes with you, right? When you have your orientation to the spirit,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
It's the wind beneath your wings. So
absolutely,
let us continue to find ways to hold ourselves accountable as a group and as a community. Let us continue to be transparent with one another as a group and as a community, so that when we go to ask, that's a ask that can't be denied for any reason.
And not just with us. If you see a person in need and you can do something about it, do something about it. Period. Like, this is the time of action. It's spirit action and physical action. It's loving relational action, but we can use our words, we can use our feet, we can use our money, any power that we have that is for the good. Now is the time for us to exercise it.
And that's what made me think about holding ourselves accountable, because how we spend our money matters. Because a lot of the things that are on these trains, we're calling for these things to be in the stores because we're purchasing these things. And so let's learn to let the voice of our spending be heard.
Definitely.
And let our spending reflect God's desire for us, and not the shoring up of oppressive systems to keep us
comfortable,
poor and poisoned.
Right. In the name of comfort.
In the name of comfort.
Whew. The choices have long-reaching consequences, both
That's
good
right.
and bad. So those are the choices that we're presented with. Well, on that note, I am going to close us out in prayer, and then I'll stay if anybody has any final questions or comments they want to make. We'll be on for a couple of more minutes. But for now, will you join us in prayer? Holy Spirit, God, our Creator, and Jesus, our example, we come to you today with hearts that want to follow you. We are human, and because you gave us free will, and because we cannot see the full picture, we are so capable of making bad choices, but we are also so capable of making good choices. So God, place on our heart the desire to ask you for what you want from each of us. Give us each the abundance to do what you call each one of us to do in this world, to bring your realm of love, joy, peace, patience, and self-control. God, we know that we are not meant to be cogs in any machine, but we are each made in the glory of your image to marvel and enjoy in the abundance of your creation. All that you ask of us in return is to love each other and love the gifts that you gave us. God, give us the strength and courage and determination and ability to stick with you and follow your spirit in every day, in every choice, and in every word. We thank you for giving us one another to comfort each other on the journey, and know that not one of us has to do it alone. We love you. We thank you for your support, for your example, and the community that you have given us. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. Good night, Jill.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
Good to see everyone. Terry, I hope that you are healing continuously from your shoulder surgery.
Yes.
I hope that either the pain block is unneeded or you have things to help you.
Good night, Carol.
Good night, Carol. Good night,
Maurice.
Tammy.
Good night.
And Maurice. Hey, Maurice. Good to see you all always. I hope that you all have some time to go outdoors and get some warm weather, get some fresh air, get some sunshine. Oh, good to see you too, Eddie.
Thank you, Eddie.
Take care of Terry.
Much love, brother.
And remember, if you guys need anything while she's recovering, text me or call and we'll be right over. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Love to Charlie as well. We had a good crowd tonight. Good to see everybody. All right. Well, on that note, farewell. We will see you next time. We'll see some of you in person on the third Sunday, and we'll see you all next month on the first Sunday. Have a good rest of your week.
Yeah. Be blessed.
Bye.